This is a new voice for a new Scotland.
IndyLife.radio. IndyPram, yes, IndyPram on IndyLife Radio. IndyPram, yes, IndyPram on IndyLife Radio.
Welcome to the IndyPram podcast on IndyLive.radio, and my guest this week is Martin Docherty Hughes, who's the MP for West Dunbartonshire. Hello to you, Martin.
Oh, hello, Raymond. How are we doing?
We're doing good. And how are you doing in this time of the COVID virus pandemic?
I'm doing well. It's challenging, and staying in contact with family and friends. And last week, I got the first opportunity to see my dad in over 9 weeks. He's 86, and also to see my sister, who lives in the same house but is shielding even from him. And she's a kidney transplant patient. So whilst we can keep an update with people, and my brother as well, it was the first time being able to see them. So in relative terms, doing well, Raymond. I hope everybody else who's listening is too.
Yeah, because our listeners will be obviously all concerned the way things have been going, but we seem to be on the path downwards, which is fortunate at long last, and as long as people maintain the guidelines that the SNP government has so soundly put in place. Could I ask you, how are you actually working at this point in time? I know it's now changed with a little bit with Jacob Rees-Mogg putting through this ridiculous stopping of the remote working. How has it affected you?
Since the beginning of remote working, the daily issues initially were around a lot of people caught abroad, and some of the, I suppose, unrealistic offers being made by the UK government about trying to get people back, where there wasn't capacity, having to assist constituents who were stuck, who couldn't get access to medication. The last constituent we were able to get home to West Dunbartonshire only came home 2 days ago.
Really?
And since the lockdown began, and that has been a daily issue. I've been in contact with ministers in the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and daily telephone calls, emails, video conferencing, and then of course the huge impact in terms of universal credit uptake. West Dunbartonshire, we've always found it a profound challenge, but the real uptake in terms of universal credit across not just Scotland but across the rest of the UK, I think would have had a profound impact on a lot of people. What was most interesting were those MPs who are not used, as I would say, to dealing with issues related to poverty. Yeah. And they're, oh, how do you deal with this? And you're thinking, you pick up the phone to a minister, or you get you and your team are talking to the right people, and you've already got connections on the ground with support mechanisms. And we're very lucky in West Dunbartonshire that we have a range of community-based, volunteer-run organisations who are there to help folk who are funded by the Scottish Government and funded by West Dunbartonshire Council as well. So we have. The key element for us is making sure those relationships were maintained at the early stages of the outbreak and the lockdown, so that people could be talking to the right people in terms of getting access to support and their social security.
So how has things worked out regarding the work with West Dunbartonshire Council and local welfare support groups?
I think the local authority, they meet virtually. There is a leadership meeting that takes place every week between not only the leader of the local authority, but the leaders of the other political parties on the council. And that has really, I think, ensured a more cohesive approach in terms of the response to the outbreak locally and how they deal with their delivery of public services. So it's tried to take the politics, which of course it's right that there should be the politics and scrutiny, but when it comes to delivery of services during a pandemic, it's about making sure that people are healthy, that they're well. And that also is for those who work in public service, specifically people who work for the council. So there has been a bit more of a cohesive approach. And also local groups such as the Golden Friendship Club in Dunbartonshire, and to deal predominantly with people with disabilities, a whole range of disabilities, in which I've got a big connection to. They have done remarkable work. Western Bartonshire Food Share, one of the food banks, as well as Western Bartonshire Food for Thought, who are based down in Dunbarton. They've been extraordinary in making sure that people have supplies, that they have access to food. A whole range of other volunteers have been accessing medication for people as well. So that's been a huge step. That's been really positive, if we can take a positive out of such a dreadful situation.
Certainly, because it's times like this then people really do pull together and the good shines through. Have you had lots of positive message of thanks for the appreciation for what's been put in?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of local organisations, yes. I mean, this week was Volunteers Week in Scotland. So, hashtag Volunteers Week Scot. And, volunteers are... a lot of people don't know they're volunteers. They don't know that they're maintaining our civic society. Our country only exists because after the Treaty of Union, we had voluntary organisations maintaining, certain elements of our history. If you use religious organisations, and I'm a person of very dubious faith, you have to be very upfront. If it wasn't for voluntary-based organisations like the Church of Scotland, the very notion of who we are probably wouldn't exist. So we owe civil society in all its forms a huge debt of gratitude, especially this week during Volunteers Week.
First Minister said she wouldn't want to go back to how things were in the past. So what benefits going forward do you think we can learn from this and move our country?
A real understanding about what public service is. And it's not just about the notion of, public service people think, or public sector, it's the council. And I do apologise if you hear a lot of barking. That's a 4-year-old whippet who's demanding to be played with at the moment. So, looking at those who work in the care sector, my sister, as I was talking about earlier on, is a kidney transplant patient, and shielding is a care worker and also a counsellor as well at the same time.
Wow.
And so there are huge discrepancies in terms of our recognition of what it is to be a frontline worker. I listened intently to my good colleague Angela Constance in Holyrood during the week, and her call for a national care programme and how that goes forward. I think, there really needs to be, for those within not just the independence movement, but for those of us within the Scottish National Party specifically, a real heart and soul look at what public service means. And I go back to what was the Christie report in terms of public service reform, and we really need to get in about that. And there's no more hiding behind anything. You need to get in behind what good public service is about, and that's about making sure people have access to information about the kind of services that they are providing, but also about what we as the person who gets the service requires.
Yeah.
I hate using words like user, that just sounds dreadful, but as the people who use public services, we need to be more vocal. And in communities like mine in Western Bartonshire, we need to be more vocal about what we require in terms of accessing a service. And that's not just about care, it's about refuse collection. It's around parks and amenities. It's around how we engage with the council in terms of our council tax. How do we pay it? Is it just about direct debit? How do we look at how the council uses our data, for example? We might talk about it later on about one of my roles as a spokesperson on Industries of the Future is that local authorities across Scotland, not just the councils, but NHS, etc., have access to a lot of data about us as individuals.
Yeah.
And why are they using it? What are they using it for? And that's a value in terms of opening that up. So we see what they're using it for. We know every time they're looking at it. And, we can complain about it if we've got openness and transparency, because that drives improvement. And we've seen that in countries across the whole of Europe. If there's openness and transparency about why councils or health boards or any other public services using our data, that drives improvement and transparency.
Leslie Riddick has spoken very much regarding Nordic countries and the smaller communities and the actual democracy being more local. How could you see that impacting Scotland as a view to the future?
Definitely. I mean, in terms of, I would rather sometimes look not just to the Nordic countries, because sometimes I think we've only got one kind of narrative coming out of our discussion about the Nordic countries. A whole range of issues in the Nordic countries we might find quite difficult in terms of their socio-political history over the last 40 to 50 years. There's some elements there that are kind of quite difficult to digest in terms of their journey to becoming social democracy, especially up until the late 70s. So I also look towards the Baltic states. I'm the co-chair of the all-party group on Estonia. And if you look at how Estonia is a small European country, Scotland is a medium-sized European country. If you look at the journey of Estonia since the end of the Soviet Union and how the Soviets left them with nothing, it's not a perfect place in any shape or form, but they have literally had the opportunity to rebuild their state from nothing. And we certainly can't build Scotland from ground zero. We have one of the oldest legal systems in Europe, one of the oldest education systems going way back, but there are huge opportunities to learn from countries like Estonia about how openness and transparency improves accountability. And maybe the challenge is not just about creating extra councils. It's also about making accountability to any public action on behalf of the state. So whether you're like Norway with over 700 councils or Scotland at the moment with 32, the only real way for me to make sure that's really empowered is that you as an individual citizen can go online at any time, look at all your public held information and see who's accessed it, why have they accessed it, and if you have a formal issue with that, you can formally complain and get something done about it. So it's one thing having whole layers of bureaucracy, but if those bureaucracies in themselves in the traditional method are only there to create, I hate using words like silos, but silos for specific individuals who become, whose voices are louder than most other people's, then it really is, for me, it's I'm not saying it's a waste, but I think it misses the point about openness and transparency. Because if you're a citizen living in Orkney and you have no idea why your council's looking at your information, you're as disenfranchised as someone sitting in Clydebank, Dumbarton or Alexandria.
That's the beauty that I find in the consideration of a future independent Scotland, is that we have the ability to completely rewrite the book based on a solid foundations of what we already have and benefit from, but we can have the time to actually pick out the best bits from the best lessons that have been learned throughout the world, whether it's the well-being, etc. now in New Zealand, the excellent aspects that you're talking about in the Baltic countries. We can go for the best, and I think it would be an ideal selling point to the nation of Scotland.
Yeah. To me, it is a selling point about how you create the opportunity for that change and openness and transparency. Because the way in which our constitutional position is at the moment, there really is, if you look at the last couple of days in which a majority government in Westminster is compelling people who really should be shielding to come back to Westminster, therefore they're not going to go back. That is about, that's a constitutional framework which is not fit for purpose. And I'm not saying that we at the moment have a perfect system in Holyrood, but what we can through independence have is something which is far more accessible, far more transparent. And I think we need to be very realistic with our fellow citizens that will take time. Estonia rebuilt its state over 20 years. Now, they rebuilt it from nothing. We're not rebuilding it from nothing. And there will be challenges, and there will be, I don't like to use the terminology elites trying to stymie change. But, there will be pushback from a range of individuals for probably very valid reasons. And, we just all need to be knowledgeable about why we want change. We need to be knowledgeable about the impact of technology and its value, not just for technology's sake. It's about adding value to our society and creating a place in which we want to live and to grow up and grow old in. So it will take time. And we need to be very open and very transparent with people that, this isn't about creating a utopia. It's about creating opportunities for all of us to have a say in the running of our country in the right direction. I think one of the real good methods is national, people's assemblies, about discussion, about debate. We've seen things like that in Iceland, which changed the constitution. And if you throw in some of the examples around Estonia, around digitisation, then there's a massive opportunity for a country with, a highly educated citizens, with more universities than you can shake a stick at. So there's huge opportunity for the future.
There was talk in the press this week regarding the SNP conference going to be potentially a virtual one.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting idea, and conference has changed so much since when I joined the SNP back in 1991. I always joke I had hair in my own teeth, and it was like a lifetime ago. So, where we had maybe 2,500 to 3,000 delegates, if not less. You could fit into the Queen Elizabeth Hall in Dunoon, and you'd end up a night out with Margaret and Winnie Ewing, So, those are changed days when you've got, huge events at the Hydro. And while that's fantastic to have that size of event, I think sometimes it does detract from, the need for robust debate. And if anything, if you're having online discussion and debate, which is facilitated in the correct manner, there's no reason why that should be as effective, if not more effective, in allowing people to participate.
Yeah, because I'm trying to balance out between the thoughts of talk of having greater input from branches, having regional meetings where lots of proposals would go through, and then the other side of the coin, the conference that had to be cancelled because of COVID was only a one-day affair at Abbey Moor, and it's not given the membership the time and space to get suggestions and progressive suggestions discussed.
I think it really needs to change its narrative in terms of conference. Is it a festival? Is it a debate? Is it discussion? And I get often very worried these days about people, have a very kind of yes and no sense of the world. Yeah. And to me, there's always three sides to a debate, left, right, right, left, and somewhere usually in the middle. And I think these kind of traditional events leave themselves wide open to small vocal groups who are very useful at getting their point over. Whereas those who are looking to learn and to engage really do need time and opportunity to take in the information and sometimes find their own voice. And you might not agree with what they say, but we live in a liberal democracy, and it is about informing our own decisions and informing ourselves by gaining knowledge from one another. And I think an online festival rather than just conference might be a big opportunity. I
think so, because I'll be open. I was completely, and I know lots of members were absolutely disappointed that Angus Brendan McNeill and Chris McElney's point to have a option B, just debated to discuss the possibility of it, was booed. And having been or viewed so many conferences, I've never seen anyone booed on the stage before.
I've seen that. It was a long time before Angus Brendan McNeill and Chris. You've got to remember when people, the 79 group were thrown out of the party. This is politics. It's there's only one plan, and it's called winning a referendum, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. So and that's a democratic process, and it's not just about us; it's about the country. And it's not just about those of us who voted yes. It's about those who voted no. Correct. Because when you rebuild a country, you rebuild it with everyone, not just everyone of your own opinion. Because the last time I looked, that was called either fascism or communism. And I, either of them, and coming from Clybank and coming from the community which I come from, which suffered at the hands of fascism through bombing, I want I'll go, stand up to that type of position. Debate needs to be couched in a respectful manner. It must be robust, and if people's views are voted against, that's democracy. And there's process, and process is very useful. It's what try and maintains a semblance of democratic participation. But I think being online will really facilitate that, because in some of the arguments that are in every political party, not just in the SNP, you will find that there are two vocal sides.
Absolutely.
And then there's folk like me who are usually sitting going, you two really need to go to the pub and go have a drink and realise that you actually quite like each other, because we're the majority, and we're the people out knocking doors. We're people talking to our friends and colleagues, talking to our neighbours who might not be natural yes voters. And there's a time for the ding dong, but there's also the time for recognising there is a joint endeavour here, and returning the sovereignty of our country fully and squarely into the hands of its citizens.
Yeah, independence first, and then we'll sort things.
Yeah, I mean, people come at independence for a whole range of reasons. You were talking earlier on, why did I join the SNP? I mean, I joined the SNP in 1991. I was 20. I come from what would traditionally have been a left-wing, extremely left-wing family. My father was a shop steward in John Brown's during the lock-ins. He was a shop steward, and he was on the stage of Clydebank Town Hall when the sheriff officers read the Riot Act. And I come from a working class family. I'm the first member of my family ever to go to university. And thanks, Mr. Blair, I've just paid off my student loan after 20 years.
Wow.
It's that I joined the party because I resolutely believed that, first of all, the nation of Scotland exists. It has existed since 843 AD, and that we have a right and a rationale to express our collective will as a country. And I believe also, coming from my type of background, that we would be far better off in terms of the majority of our citizens having a role in directing the governance and destiny of our country. And I'm sure it will come as no surprise with a kind of Irish background like mine as well, that I often used to think, well, if the land of my grandmother and grandfather can be freed, then why can't Scotland? And that always used to kind of dumbfound me. I used to listen to people in the Labour Party talking about the history of the UK, and I mean UK, I mean United Kingdom as it was, and also Ireland at the time, and I used to find that quite bizarre and quite hypocritical. And I always challenged that. So when I had the first opportunity to join a political party, I joined the SNP, and then found myself elected 6 months later as Scotland's youngest ever councillor at the age of 21. So that was a bit of a baptism of fire.
And you became a Bailey, didn't you?
Well, not until well later on. I was elected in 1992 to the old Clydebank district, and then left local government in 1996. Went away to try and get an education, and then eventually, after a bit of a hiatus, and I returned to Frontline in 2012, being elected to then Glasgow City Council. I was living in Glasgow at the time, and become a Bailey. It was quite a strange kind of concept, walking about wearing a chain. It was a little bit weird, but hey ho. That's the history. What can you say? There's stories of the Baileys taking their chains to the pawn shops, and somebody for the chamber's going to have to go and get them, but I was not one of those. No. So, being at the front line was also very important for me, because you see the front line of politics, and that's about public service delivery, and you recognise the value and worth of colleagues in other parties as well, because if you just want to shout at people all day, you're going to absolutely do nothing. You've got to work with people. You've got to work with your neighbours. You've got to work with your friends, and you've got to work with your family. And guess what? We all don't agree in the same type of political future. But I think what we can all share is public service. And I think it's really, really important when you're getting into frontline politics. And a lot of people don't like it when I say it, but I think try 5 years in local government. Try 5 years at the front line in very difficult circumstances that people find themselves in, where they'll be at your councillor's surgery. And I think that after independence, there are huge opportunities for reinvigorating local government in Scotland. I'm a huge fan of the empowerment from the local level, and how we use community empowerment over and above the Community Empowerment Act.
How do you find working with Labour? Because obviously under the Holyrood Parliament, you have SNP, MSP with Gil Patterson in one area, and you've got Jackie Bailey working in the other. How is it working with them?
I will disagree in a range of other issues, but I try and work, in the understanding to the benefit of the people who elect me. And I think if you get caught up on personality, that you lose focus, and you lose focus on why you're in public service. Other than extremists, if you're participating in the democratic process, I'll work with you. I may disagree with you in a range of issues, but I will work with people across party structures to make sure the best outcome for the people that I am elected to represent.
You're a spokesperson for industries of the future and blockchain. Could you give a little bit more insight on that? How it could affect Scotland going forward?
I think I was talking earlier on about countries like Estonia, and there's a huge opportunity for us to learn about what types of technology have added value for us as a country. And if you look like a small country like Estonia, in which the Soviet Union left with nothing, and how it's grown its economy, how it uses digital frameworks to improve access to public services. They're not doing it just to show off to people that they're good with tech. What they are doing is they're using it to make sure that people have access to information about why the government is doing what it does, why a doctor might be looking at your records today when you're not in the surgery, why the police might look at your records, why a council department might be looking at your record. If there's a clause in law in Estonia that you only need to look once, so you shouldn't be asking a citizen the same question 20 million times. Departments can get the information online. So for me, I think there's huge opportunities to learn from countries like Estonia, and there's also opportunities for them to learn from us in issues around inclusion. Estonia has huge opportunities to learn from them about how we change our engagement with the democratic process. I think in the last local government elections in Estonia, over 40% of the population voted online. So that gets around the issue that some people will have with postal voting. It will get around the issue that some people will have around what they think is voter manipulation and fraud. I think slightly that's a wee bit over-egged sometimes, I really do. But I think in terms of how the Estonians have done it, they have created systems which are very robust and very secure. If there are issues around cyber activity, they're very open about it. They deal with it in their legal frameworks. And that's a small European country whose probably major natural resource is milk. So when you think about a medium-sized European country of 5 million, with all its natural mineral wealth, with its highly educated population, with its universities and resources, with access to the North Atlantic, there are huge opportunities for us to learn from them in driving change. But it's not just change for saying, oh, we're involved in tech. It's about making sure that you can go online, that you can book your appointment with the doctor, that you don't need to go to the doctor's surgery to get your repeat prescription. You just press a button and then you go and collect it. There's even, with the dreadful outcomes of COVID-19, some of the issues that we were finding here in Scotland was about the registration of death. In Estonia, what you would find is that the doctor or nurse who was there at the moment of death can register it straight away. So, having to wait to go to a registrar's office or submit paperwork, it is just ridiculous in the 21st century. And I'm saying that publicly about our own situation. And that could be easily transformed by allowing ourselves to digitize that process, but only doing so when we as citizens have full access to that information. It's not closed. It's not someone saying, oh, why do you want access to that? The answer is, here it's open, it's transparent, it's your information, and you have every right under the law to, and morally, to see it.
Mm-hmm. And have it secure.
Indeed, yes.
Right, you're also on the defence team. You're a defence team member.
Yes, I sit on the Defence Select Committee, which is rather interesting. I'm the only Scottish constituency MP on the committee, only member of the SNP on it. and I've been on it since the 2017 election. And I've not it's quite bizarre, because whilst we try and be collegiate in a lot of the things that we do, I certainly do challenge their addiction to weapons of mass destruction.
Yep.
Challenge their, the way in which they treat members of the armed forces. They don't pay them properly. They don't even see them as employees. And, it is a bizarre Victorian ideas of military service, which, as someone who has family in the armed forces, my brother has served in Iraq and twice in Afghanistan. My nephew is in the Royal Engineers. Coming from that type of service family, and there are plenty of us in the SNP and also in the Yes movement, we see day in, day out how members of the armed forces are treated. So some MPs have found it quite interesting to have that different perspective on a Defence Select Committee.
Foreign Affairs team member as well. So what sorts of work does that involve for you?
Well, that's really kind of linked to Defence Select Committee, because we act as an overall joint team, the Foreign Affairs Scotland and the World team. Mm-hmm. So there'll be myself in Defence, Carol Monaghan, Angela Crawley joined us after the last election. Angela, a great addition, and Stuart Malcolm MacDonald is our Defence spokesperson. And we work collegiately with the Foreign Affairs team as well, and under this kind of umbrella of Scotland and the World. So it's making sure that a lot of the issues around foreign affairs, which may relate to defence, are all connected, that the team understands what's going on. For example, if you're looking at countering Daesh in Iraq, how does military activity either support or undermine re-radicalization of Iraq? So that's a huge foreign affairs issue. It's also a defence issue. You see the radicalization of young people in camps in Iraq because they're treated in such a bad way. You see the impact of radicalization, through, if you look at the impact on women in Iraq, military decisions have a profound issue on the long-term foreign policy. So, for example, a big issue in Iraq at the moment is women who were divorced by their then husbands by a text message.
Oh, wow.
And they were divorced because their husbands went and joined Daesh and married somebody else. So a woman will be left with, say, a couple of kids, stateless, because she's identified now by the Iraqi state as being married to someone from Daesh. She will say, but I was divorced via text. They're put into camps. And the very issue which they don't want to re-emerge is happening, that their children are going to be radicalised in these camps. So that's where a military decision has a profound impact on the lives of someone in a camp, but it also linked to foreign policy as well. And that's something we as a country after independence will need to understand, that
Absolutely.
It's not just about us in Europe, it's about us in the world.
Yeah.
Other issue is Hong Kong. If we look at Hong Kong and some of the challenges there about engaging with the People's Republic of China, the Communist Party of China is not interested in the right to self-determination in Tibet. It's not interested in how we view its position in terms of treating the Uyghurs. And Hong Kong and Taiwan, for example, are other examples of that. And we will need to be more vocal, and we will need to make a decision about how we utilise, foreign investment in our country. And that's all related to foreign policy and defence policy. And that's going to be a huge challenge for a few people, because should we really be taking money from a communist dictatorship? Places in a very difficult position. Yeah. I think, we have enough resource and ability where we really don't need that type of investment. And that's a huge challenge to everybody.
Absolutely. No, what certainly strikes me just now, just talking to you, Martin, is the amount of wealth of experience that yourself and other SNP MPs are going to bring to the table for a future independent Scotland, and help that government make those relations and build on that knowledge base that you've built up. And
well, I don't know about that. I always used to say I'm going to come home and open up a laundrette, I don't know.
You're down there, don't forget, you're down there to settle up, not settle down.
See, now I come home, I just So, our country's full of people who have got a lot of talent.
Yeah.
And it's about making sure that they have the opportunity to participate, to ensure that our democracy is open, it's transparent. And those two words are bandied about all the time. But again, I do go back to countries like Estonia, and I said it's not perfect. But they use technology not just for the use of technology's sake. They use it to make their country more open. And there's a huge reason for that. They have a large neighbour. And their large neighbour is a very destabilising force in the world. Yeah. And, some people's neighbours are the United States, and they're just as destabilising as others at the moment. But when if you're a population of 1.5 million, and the Russian Federation, and I'm not talking about the Russian people here, the Russian people it's a fuel for them in a profound way. But if your government is run by a guy like Vladimir Putin, and take my word for it, as an openly gay man, I have no truck with that guy. Uh-huh. He's a fascist. And, when you have him as a neighbour, the only way in which you can maintain your liberty and your freedom is to offer something completely different. Yeah. That is openness and transparency. And there is a substantial minority of Estonians who are native Russian speakers. And, people would say, well, why don't they go back to Russia? And they don't go back to Russia for a very simple reason. Well, first of all, they're at home. Estonia is their home. And they also know that to go and live in a country where they weren't born in would mean giving up a lot of the liberties and freedoms that they already had. Yeah. And yes, there are challenges in Estonia and some other Baltic states around inclusion and the rates of poverty within the Russian-speaking population. But they are doing a lot of work to try and overcome that. And in 2007, when the Russian Federation shut down the IT systems of the Estonian government, and there were, some people would say little green men going across the border. It wasn't, what some people would say ethnic Estonians that chased them back over. It was Russian Estonians. Right. Who's, on your bike. Yeah. This is our home. This is our country. And we quite enjoy the freedoms and liberties that we have. So, we've all got, we need to see the world in a bigger picture. And I think our history and our interconnect, if we reconnect with the world, we'll have a lot to give. We're no better and we're no worse than anyone else. But I just think the world would be a far better place if we as an independent country could participate in it even, an equal footing.
How do you feel in relation to the way this pandemic, the political implications of it, and how Scotland's been treated, whether it's been a stopping of our supply of PPE on instructions from the government to foreign suppliers, the way we've been treated by the unionists, MSPs, Holyrood, where it's all very well to put someone under scrutiny, but they have used this time to just hit out politically.
Well, that's the nature of liberal democratic politics. And I'm always conscious that people start saying, this one's saying that and that one's saying that. Well, when I talk to my constituents, when I talk to my neighbours, not all who would vote for me or for the SNP or a pro-independence party, because we're not the only pro-independence party. Many of them are what I would call traditional unionists, would traditionally vote a kind of old-fashioned form of conservatism. And they are struck not by the Scottish Conservative Unionist Party, but they're struck by Boris Johnson. And in many ways, these others that you're talking about, who you think some people would say are very vocal, they don't even know who they are. And their part on viewing the world is that the union, and I think we really do need to, especially in the Yes movement, we really need to be more understanding of where people's support of the union has come from. And if I've been talking to some people recently who would say, could we afford the furloughing scheme, for example, if we were an independent country? My example is, well, can Ireland can achieve it? I can't imagine why we wouldn't. It's giving examples and giving knowledge. And of course, they'll come back and say, well, that's actually quite a good answer. Yeah. In terms of our GDP and balance of trade and our element of, our deficit, etc. when you look at it in real terms and not just calculated in the UK balance sheet, but actually in the Scottish balance sheet. So I think we need to be a wee bit more articulate. People are looking for answers. They're not looking to be shouted at. They're looking for a reason to vote for this. They're looking for a reason for their country to be independent. It's the same questions that many people would have asked themselves 100 years ago about why would we vote for, or even 50 or 60, even 80 years ago, why would we vote for governments which would propose the NHS? Why would we want these huge constitutional changes? There's nothing wrong with asking questions. Anyone who's in any type of liberal democratic, social democratic process, if you're frightened of people asking you a question, get out of the way. There's people out there who will be willing to answer them without being shouted at, without being stigmatised. And you can be a Scot and a unionist, a Scot and a believer in independence, and a Scot and believing in a global world order. So we really need to be more respectful of one another and understand the challenges that a lot of our fellow citizens are under, because a lot of them want to vote for it, and we need to give them the answers that they're looking for.
Any timescale, Martin, when you can expect a lot of discussion?
When we can win it?
When we can, when we can, I think we could win it any time it's called, to be personally. I bet you felt that for the last year or two.
It depends on who you speak to. Mm-hmm. I'm sure if I speak to every person who voted yes the last time, or who, is a huge believer in independence, of course they'll vote for independence. But we need to realise that, it's not just us that make up Scotland. The story of Scotland after 1707 will continue to be part of our history after independence. And people like me will not allow that to be swept away, because whether it's good or bad, it's a part of our lived experience as a nation and as a country. And, we need to recognise that we need to convince people, because, it's about us as a nation stepping forward. And yeah, it will be, for some people, it will be a risk. But the bigger risk for me, and my rationale, is a far bigger risk being part of a political union in which we're not equals, in which we do not, as a nation, have an equal say, and in which the governments we seek to elect are never in full administrative control on our behalf in the government. The only answer for that, for me, is for us to be to retain our sovereignty and to keep it.
One final question I was going to ask you about, Martin, was it looks very much as though we are going to have a hard Brexit. What do you feel of the implications would be for Western Bartonshire?
Oh God, profound. On top of COVID-19, do you know when Brexit started, in terms of the actual referendum and the vote? And of course, I give you an example. When I returned to the British Parliament at that time, the then Brexit Secretary, David Davis, stood up and said the industrial working class of Britain have voted for Brexit. And I took a great joy in standing up and reminding them that the industrial working class of West Dunbartonshire voted for the European Union and voted for their country to be an independent sovereign one as well. That went down like a lead balloon with them. But the simple impact is when you have a constituent who is in their 60s, was born in Paris and came home to Scotland at 3 months, and suddenly finds himself having to be a naturalised UK citizen. And that process took 3 years.
Ridiculous.
2016. So that has a profound implication on an individual. And then there's the implications of business, the implications of getting care workers, implications on the NHS, and NHS implications on just every element of the economy. And we heard the British Prime Minister only yesterday asking for EU workers to come back to the UK. Can you imagine being in the European Union and think to yourself, shall I go live in a political state, because this is not a country, it is a political state where I am deemed to be a second-class citizen and no longer of value?
Correct.
Now That's a lived experience for a lot of them.
I thought that was so hypocritical. I couldn't believe it.
And people will say, West Dunbartonshire, what kind of impact will Brexit have on a community like West Dunbartonshire? Profound. A lot of people folk from West Dunbartonshire were born in Poland, in France, and other parts of the European Union, and this has had a profound impact on them, and it will impact major projects in the area. I've got huge concerns about the viability of some projects, major infrastructure projects, and how it will go forward with a hard Brexit, especially on top of the economic fallout of COVID-19. So, when I look at some of the people who are in charge of the negotiations from the UK side, and I think to myself, what a parcel of rogues, a real parcel of rogues. And my only hope is that we will get to a point with a referendum where we will have the opportunity to go back into a political and economic union where we will be respected alongside everyone else as equal members of that political and economic union.
One very final point that was in the news from Balloch there the other day was the amount of people who disregarded the COVID guidelines and piled up to Balloch. And there was I think quite a few complaints from residents up there. What were your thoughts?
Stay home, support the NHS and save lives.
That's all it can be. Martin, thank you very much. It's been
pleasure, Raymond,
great.
And big hello to you and to all the team in your part of the world, and stay safe, stay well, and we'll talk soon.
Great stuff. Thanks for your contribution to the IndyPram podcast on IndyLive.radio.
IndyPram, yes, IndyPram on IndyLive Radio. IndyPram, yes, IndyPram on IndyLive Radio.
This is a new voice for a new Scotland.
IndyLive.radio.